June 22nd, 2016. The Chicago Bulls have traded away three-time All-Star and the youngest NBA MVP in the history of the game, Derrick Rose. With that ends an electrifying 4-year lead by Rose, making it to the conference finals in the 2011 season and trying to compete every year after. But after Derrick Rose's injury in 2012, the trajectory of the Bulls' playoff chances fell to the floor as DRose's health deteriorated. But now in the 2016 offseason, the Bulls found a way to trade Rose for salary filler and to get out of potentially paying him while also starting a new era for the Windy City. But since that fateful day, the Bulls have found themselves in the worst place in the NBA, middle of the Road Purgatory. And it was at the fault of many people. Whether it was creating a terrible culture with one of the worst NBA coaches of all time, paying has-been players too much money to stay in the middle, making terrible trades to create the same result, and much, much more. And for what? 2 first-round exits, 3 coaches, and only 1 winning season in the last 8 years. What we'll be discussing today is how the Chicago Bulls ruined everything for themselves and created the situation they are in now with an aging Demar Derozan who may leave for nothing, a very disgruntled Zach Lavine, and Nikola Vucevic who they traded 2 protected first-round picks for that they ended up losing for debatably subpar production. With that being said, if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to like the video. And now we are officially on the road to 100,000 subscribers, so be sure to subscribe to be a part of that and to catch more videos as usual. But with that being said, this be a long one, but you already know who it is. Roll it!
3, 2, 1.
Waits in the weight room, so he stitched up in the left hand.
And unfortunately for the Bulls, they won't be making the playoffs most likely, but I know a perfect way to watch your favorite team this playoff season in the NBA with the sponsor of today's video, Game Time, your outlet for the best ticket marketplace out there for sporting events in more than 60 cities across the US and Canada right now from their phone or PC. As a big-time sports fan who goes to many events, I've used many different ticket apps and the problems were all the same. Whether it was the lack of deals, having problems accessing my ticket when I needed it, or knowing where my view would be with the ticket that I bought. But with the Game Time app, you'll get all of that and much more. With Game Time, you can see all the events in your cities, get an accurate seat preview second to none, and most importantly, be met with deals, whether it's sponsored directly by Game Time or zone deals for sitting in a specific area. And if you find a price lower than what's advertised, Game Time will credit you with 110% of the difference with their Game Time price guarantee. And with their main catch, you can buy tickets at the last minute, an hour before the event starts, or even as the event is starting, where you can save 60% off. So if you want to create some memories like I did, be sure to use my sponsor, Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code ALVINI for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code ALVINI, ALVINI, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And thanks again for Game Time for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into it. Like I mentioned in the intro, the Chicago Bulls have been on a slight decline ever since the viral DRose injury in the 2012 playoffs, where the Bulls are trying to spin the block on the Eastern Conference and make it back to the conference finals. But after DRose got injured in the final minutes of the first game of that series, the trajectory of the Bulls fell massively due to the massive health issues from DRose's knees from his ACL tear. And as we know, he'd go on to miss the entire next season due to that, playing only the first 10 games of the next season before going down for another season-ending surgery. And now we're in the 2014-15 season where the Bulls now see DRose come back at as healthy as he has been since that infamous game. But the Bulls also went hard to bring DRose more help to go back to the conference finals, especially now that LeBron James is back in Cleveland, coming in the form of 2-time NBA champion Pau Gasol, 6-man Aaron Brooks, and signing EuroLeague product Nikola Vucevic, who they own the draft rights to. And while they still had Joakim Noah and a 4th-year Jimmy Butler, who just earned all defensive team honors and became a first-time All-Star, this team, if DRose can stay at least near the top of his game, can still compete, and the ACL tear can definitely just be a thing of the past. And as they won 50 games that year, earning the 3rd seed, we see DRose be truly affected by that injury, having one of his worst scoring seasons of his career, averaging 40% from the field and 28% from 3. But with the surge of Jimmy Butler, the most improved player in that season, and an all-star leading the team scoring wise, this would slowly stop being DRose's team game by game. And while the Bulls would win their first series against the Bucks, they met up again against their old rival in LeBron James, who they actually had on the ropes at one point, owning a 2-1 series lead off a game-winning DRose bucket from 3 that totally shifted the momentum for his hometown team.
Dunleavy looking, finds Rose. Rose trying to get open, fires away. Bang! It's over! The Bulls win at the buzzer!
But as they proceed to lose the next 3 games and lose the series outright, the question started to arise going into the offseason. Jimmy Butler, who is 25, the leader of the team scoring-wise, and a 2-time All-Star, is looking to be the future of the Windy City. While DRose, who is easily showing his athletic decline and thus decline in his game, is coming up on a contract year. Will the Bulls go into a new era with Jimmy Butler, or will DRose be trusted and stay long-term alongside him? And that question made the 2016 season so important on a lot of facets, for the management, the players, and the future of the franchise. Going into the next season, though, the answer already seemed obvious. First off, Tom Thibodeau will be fired on May 28, 2015 for the services of Fred Hoiberg. But what made this firing so interesting, despite his success as the coach already, was the fact that, according to ESPN, quote, the Bulls' dissatisfaction with their coach beyond the well-chronicled tension between Thibodeau and Bulls manager Gar Forman and executive vice president John Paxson had arisen in the wake of the Bulls' inability to beat injury-plagued Cleveland in the playoffs and a lack of offensive flow to match their usual defensive tenacity, end quote. So Fred Hoiberg was brought in to be the opposite of what Tom was, an offensive strategist rather than a defensive team first. But as many Bulls fans are unfortunately too familiar with, another reason he'd be hired was due to this quote here. Hoiberg's arrival in Chicago isn't a surprise. He has been a longtime favorite of the Bulls front office and has become a close friend of general manager Gar Forman over the past 2 decades. But while there's criticism for the clear show of politics in the franchise, Hoiberg did have a vision of what he wanted by saying, quote, we had the second fastest pace of play in all of college basketball last year. We like to get out and play with pace and play with spacing. I think we ran more pick and rolls than anybody in college basketball. We really like to flow into an offense as opposed to coming down and getting set on every possession. But while the optimism was high, the question I asked before comes in with a clear answer very early in the season. First, you see Joakim Noah suffer a season-ending shoulder injury after the new year, and second, absolutely nothing was working in Fred Hoiberg's system, ranking in the bottom 10 of offensive rating, while the Tom Thibodeau-led team from last year was ranked 11th at the end of the season. So ending the season 42-40 and only 2 games out of the 8th seed, it was safe to say change was really needed in Chicago. And that brings us right back to the beginning of the video. June 22nd, 2016. The Chicago Bulls have traded away 3-time All-Star and the youngest NBA MVP in the history of the game, Derrick Rose, for a 2017 second-round pick, Jose Calderon, Jerian Grant, and Robin Lopez in an effort to move on from Rose and also avoid paying him the next offseason, and also trying to get something for his dwindling value around the league. And with that recap bringing us right back up to this point, it is time to see just how this franchise turned themselves into the NBA's laughingstock. The 2016 offseason comes with a lot of loss in the heat of free agency for the Chicago Bulls. First, they traded Derrick Rose for pieces who will probably not provide much towards any successful team. Unless you're asking Robin Lopez to bully an opposing team's mascot, then he's a max-worthy player. Next, the upcoming 36-year-old Pau Gasol, who was just an all-star with the Chicago Bulls, now signs with the San Antonio Spurs to go after his 3rd championship that he's wanted since his 2-peat with Kobe Bryant. And finally, the final blow, longtime Chicago Bull Joakim Noah would go alongside Derrick Rose in New York, signing a 4-year, $72 million deal. For my New York Knicks fans out there, I know you didn't like that move at all. So just like that, 3 former All-Stars, well, obviously not going to stay at that level. So 3 former pillars of your team all leave at one time or have been dealt with in one off season. While some may say that is going to put Chicago in the basement immediately, what Chicago fans also know is that they have a lot of money saved up in salary cap from all three of them leaving, and the prospect of representing one of the most historic franchises in league history is on the table for anyone to come in. Add alongside the fact that Jimmy Butler is growing into a real threat as a two-way player, with the right signings or moves, the Bulls can be right back to where they were a few years ago and competing for an NBA championship. But as there are many top free agents far and wide that could be signed, the choices the Chicago Bulls would have is very limited to say the least, as a lot of those top players would go to other teams. But with Team GM Gar Forman and Vice President John Paxson wanting to continue to go after another championship, they go by any means necessary to make that happen. And the NBA world would see that immediately.
The Chicago Bulls picked up a quarterback, Ron, and it is Rajon Rondo. He is in the fold with Chicago for 2 years and almost $28 million. The second season reported to be partially guaranteed. Now, he's 30 years old, led the league in assists last year. How about his fit with Chicago? How do you see this going?
Look, I think it's going to work. You know, I'm a Rondo fan. You're talking about a guy that gives it up on both sides of the ball. He's not a liability defensively, averaged a double-double last season. You know, led the league in assists. You know, his problem is not on the floor. He's been known to be a little moody, known to be a little quirky at times. He's a very headstrong sort of player. The key with this lineup is, can he and Butler, who also is a headstrong guy, can those guys gel? Can those guys get on the same page? But in terms of playing basketball, that's not a problem with Rondo.
The first major move of the 2016 offseason for the Chicago Bulls is signing Kings guard Rajon Rondo. Post-Boston Celtics Rajon Rondo has been on a very interesting journey of headlines after headline after headline about his actions and attitude on and off the court. But after his amazing season with the Kings, where he averaged a league high and career high 11.7 assists per game, he became a highly sought after free agent and went to the Bulls on a 2-year $27 million deal. The main question would be, how would he and Jimmy Butler coexist on the same team due to their very interesting personalities? Well, we just have to wait and see, because the Bulls still have plenty of money to throw around to make this team a contender overnight. And only 8 days later, they go about making a signing that all Chicago Bulls fans, well, would have to witness.
Breaking news here on SportsCenter. The Chicago Bulls on the verge of landing Dwade Wade, believing they have trade partners willing to take on Jose Calderon, Mike Dunleavy, to clear the necessary salary cap space. Wade, a Chicago area native, looking to be coming home, just as former teammate LeBron James did. Welcome into SportsCenter. A lot of ground to cover with Diana Rossini. I am Max Bretos. Just like we saw with Kevin Durant, one city celebrates, another, well, bad news, and that one this time around is Miami.
Yeah, the Miami only offered 2 years, $40 million. Dwade Wade said he was worth 2 years, $50 million. Is sort of a Kobe Bryant type deal is what he was looking for. And it seems that the Chicago Bulls are going to be the team that are going to be able to give him the money that he is looking for.
The end of the D Wade and Miami era at the time was a very interesting one, to say the least. Seeing Chris Bosh's teammate get a max extension and also seeing Hassan Whiteside getting the same treatment, D Wade wanted the same himself, around the 2-year $50 million range. But Pat Riley was playing major hardball with the man who brought the Heat their first ever championship as a franchise and added 2 more with LeBron James years later. But in his decline, Wade was still trying to get some of that NBA money, but Riley wasn't having any of it. This was truly before us fans found out that the NBA is a business worldwide by the actions of NBA executives, but Pat would let D Wade walk in free agency. But the Bulls saw a 35-year-old D Wade and wanted him immediately for a hometown reunion and a chance at success, all in one free agency class. But after clearing up some space, the Bulls was able to sign D Wade to a 2-year $47 million deal, the most expensive player on the team now being a 35-year-old Dwade Wade. I don't know what the Bulls were expecting here, but the only credit I will give the Bulls front office was the fact that they gave both Bosh and Rondo 2-year deals. But as the season comes around, you have a day one lineup of Rondo, Wade, Butler, Taj Gibson, and Robin Lopez. A very interesting group of names together on the court, and they had one mission: to win an NBA championship somehow. But anyone who's been keeping up with the NBA knew the Chicago Bulls this season were one of the most inconsistent teams in the association in many ways. Lineups, performance, coaching, the whole 9 yards. With a strong 10-6 start on the year, the Bulls looked like they could actually compete in the weak Eastern Conference with that makeshift big three that could cause some damage with Dwade and Jimmy Butler serving as the scorers while Rondo gets everybody else involved. But after a 6-12 run right after the New Year's, being 6-18, we see a common trend start with the Chicago Bulls team, and that would be with Fred Hoiberg messing with the lineups and causing even more problems on the team. After only playing 11 minutes in the first half against the Indiana Pacers, Fred Hoiberg would actually pull Rajon Rondo out of the rotation in general for 5 straight games. 0 minutes, DNPs, coach's decision. And then after the fact, make him a 6-man for the foreseeable future while Michael Carter-Williams and Jerian Grant would share starting duties. An interesting move to say the least, but this move would be the start of many interesting things that Fred Hoiberg would do and try to make some type of run out of this team that was created out of thin air. But the problems were absolutely everywhere on this team. Whether it was Rondo now coming off the bench, Jimmy Butler and Dwade fighting over ownership, or the offense of the team, and Hoiberg creating 23 different starting lineups that year. Overall, you see the Bulls that year end their season 8-3 with Rondo now back in the starting lineup and having the dust finally settle over the season with a record of 41-41. Straight up 500 in the season in the most dramatic way possible. And due to them winning that tiebreaker with the now also 500 Miami Heat, the Chicago Bulls would somehow, some way make the NBA playoffs. In this season, though, when it comes to positives, you see Jimmy Butler, despite all the drama around him, average career high scoring wise, scoring 24 points a game and also earning all NBA third team honors. Jimmy Butler shows the vitals and stats to prove that he can lead a team for sure, but the cast of characters he has around him aren't going to move the needle at all, losing one more game than they did the year before. However, lucking out this time around, getting into playoffs. And when it comes to the star move in free agency to get Dwade, we see more of his decline with him averaging 18 points per game and having career lows in field goal percentage, truly showing that first off, he wasn't worth the contract and that Pat Riley may have been justified in his actions of not giving him all that money, and that Dwade is truly not the Flash anymore as a 35-year-old man. And for Rondo, he got the worst out of the three when it came to treatment, going from starting point guard to getting DNPs due to the coach, and now being a 6-man only, being moved back up at the end of the season. But somehow, some way, they still ended the season 500 and had the privilege of going against the first seed of the East, the Boston Celtics, led by king of the fourth quarter, no, not Kenny Beecham, but Isaiah Thomas, 3rd place in points per game and the clutchest player in the league that year. But if the Bulls wanted to beat the Celtics, they have to deal with him first in a series where you'd argue they are completely outmatched. Coaching-wise, players-wise, everywhere-wise. But the expected outcome of this series will be flipped upside down as the Bulls would actually take a 2-0 series lead, shocking the NBA world as the most inconsistent and toxic team in the NBA, beating the now best team in the East. It starts off with the Bulls hitting on all cylinders, with Jimmy Butler leading the way with 30 points and a surprise appearance from second-year player from Arkansas, Bobby Portis, who scored 19 points off the bench. But most importantly, Jimmy Butler would duel with the king of the fourth quarter, outscoring him 15-8 and scoring the Bulls' final 5 points to win the game 106-102. But in game 2, there would be absolute domination of the first seed as the Bulls had 6 players in double figures, and they would also see Rajon Rondo dish 14 assists in the game, while the Celtics as a team were struggling to score as a unit, and weirdly enough, Isaiah Thomas would be seen going 7 of 13 from the free throw line. But that again gives the Bulls a 111-97 win. However, that optimism would immediately go back down to earth when the news came out that Rajon Rondo would be diagnosed with a fractured thumb, taking him out for the series. From there, the series went back to being a normal 1-8 series, 104-87, 104-95, 108-97, and finally to seal the deal, a 105-83 loss in Chicago. The reverse sweep has been complete and the Bulls were eliminated from the playoffs. Some people still say to this day that if Rajon Rondo's playmaking and defense on IT was there to finish the job, the Bulls could have completed the rare 8-1 series upset. And with how night and day this offense became once Rondo was gone from the lineup, I am definitely inclined to believe it. But with that series loss, the Bulls are at a loss and have more questions to answer. Firstly, Rondo and Wade's future on the team, one being partially guaranteed and the other one having a player option. If they both decided to stay and if the team decided to let them stay, can this team potentially create something and go for another attempt at a playoff run, even if this team is definitely toxic? And secondly, the future of Jimmy Butler, now turning 28 years old. Do you keep him on the team and make him your franchise player despite his prime definitely gonna end sooner than you'd like it to, or try to use his all-star level value and make a banger of a trade for assets? Because you could argue, despite making the playoffs quite barely, the move they made for Rondo and Wade was not it, and due to the contract terms, they could fix this issue and try something else in the future. So once again, the 2017 offseason will be one of the most important ones for the Bulls in a long time. Immediately going into the 2017 offseason, the debate of whether the Bulls wanted to continue going into the future with Jimmy Butler would be answered almost immediately. At this point, Jimmy Butler has been raised from being a defensive wing to a two-way role player to now an all-star level player. But as he's coming up on his 28th birthday next season, is he going to be considered in this potential new age of the Chicago Bulls? Well, I won't even act like it wasn't out of nowhere, because it wasn't, because on draft night, the Bulls would trade three-time All-Star Jimmy Butler alongside a 16th pick Justin Patton for the services of 2016 top 5 pick Chris Dunn, lottery pick from the 2014 class Zach Lavine, and the 2017 first-round pick Lauri Markkanen. This move now shows that the Bulls were willing to tank and start all over ever since getting Derrick Rose in 2008. And what a time to do it, taking advantage of Jimmy Butler at his absolute peak basketball age. And at the same time, he get to join his old coach in Tom Thibodeau, who became the team president and coach of the Minnesota Timberwolves last year. So with the DRose era officially over and done with all the pieces of the team gone, it is time for a new era. And it starts with the new players traded to the Bulls. First off, we have Zach Lavine, who last year, despite having a season-ending ACL tear injury, really improved in his third season as a volume scorer. In Chicago, he will have the opportunity of a lifetime to lead his own team and not be behind the likes of Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, even though he worked very well alongside them. He was traded to become the new leader and take over Jimmy's new role long term, but obviously making sure he's healthy first is the main priority of the Bulls medical staff. Next, we have a top 5 pick in Chris Dunn, who at Providence starred as a two-way point guard, but in his rookie season in Minnesota, he would struggle mightily and have a real inconsistent role on a Tom Thibodeau-led team, because as we know, he ain't one to play young guys and is usually very tight about his rotations. His development will be watched with his first real chance to actually show his skills on the NBA level and hoping to actually be what he was drafted to become in the first place. Because now, as a 23-year-old second-year player, the time is ticking and his chances will be minimal. And finally, the 7th pick of the class, Lauri Markkanen, the 7-foot stretch big with real unicorn potential to be a do-it-all scorer from all 3 levels. And at Arizona, where he made 69 nice 3-pointers in the season as a 7-footer, the first time in 20 seasons since someone has done that, his potential as a unicorn was thought to be there. But obviously, Rome wasn't built in a day, and there is still plenty to learn about the NBA before that potential can be really tapped into. However, before starting this new era, you still have some people to deal with, and those people are Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo, the 2 highest paid players on the team, and now not on the timeline for this new era. Rondo was easy enough to deal with. He was waived 8 days before the draft, and that gives the Bulls a financial break as they had a team option on Rondo, and the $13 million he could have made would have been guaranteed if he wasn't waived by a certain point. However, a deal that was guaranteed was the $23 million player option that Dwade signed on the dotted line and is now on the Chicago Bulls books. But after many attempts to get rid of Wade, they finally had to bite the bullet and buy out his large contract. At least it brings more opportunities to other players on the team, but money-wise, I'm sure the Bulls regret that signing a lot, paying him an immediate $15 million in that deal. But now the Bulls can roll into the next season with no expectations and to see what exactly this young team can do. And since they own their own picks for the future and beyond, this will serve the Bulls very well in the aspect of a future trade or picking up more products in this tank job. And it's safe to say that the 2017-18 NBA season had virtually zero positives for the Chicago Bulls. For the majority of the season, Zach Lavine will be healing from his injury from the year before and only lasted 24 games before going right back down due to knee issues. And without Zach Lavine or really any sort of offense, the Chicago Bulls would start the 2018 season with a record of 3-20. One of the worst starts in Chicago Bulls history and one of the worst starts in NBA history. We'd also see Chris Dunn in his first opportunity as a primary rotational player have a pretty up and down year. Defensively, he was a star, averaging 2 steals a game and the Bulls' best perimeter defender, but offensively, the same struggles followed him from his season before, and he was looking like a certified bust, unfortunately. However, he did show himself to be a good playmaker, setting up his teammates while using his athleticism, but when it came to putting the ball in the hoop, he couldn't translate his college play to the NBA ranks. However, the shining light at the end of this terrible tunnel with the 3 players who was traded to Chicago would be Lauri Markkanen in his rookie season, where he'd average 15 points with 7 rebounds and serving as the team's best 3-point shooter. He even became the fastest player to ever hit 100 threes in their career, only taking 41 games to do so. Again, Lauri Markkanen had a future in the NBA, but the Bulls' goal is to make him a little bit more well-rounded offensively, because while his 3-point shot is lethal, when you only convert on 35% of your mid-ranges and basically living off of your height in the paint, there is work that needs to be done. But as you look down the roster, you see more inconsistency and very few positives or players taking advantage of this very vital situation. But in this season, we see the Bulls take advantage of some of these players' values, with Nikola Vucevic, a standout with the Chicago Bulls, being traded to the New Orleans Pelicans for Amir Sick, Jameer Nelson, Tony Allen, and a protected 2018 first-round pick. Unfortunately, as we all know, during the season, third-year player Bobby Portis and Nikola Vucevic would get into it in practice, and it ended up with Nikola Vucevic's jaw getting absolutely shattered. And with Nikola asking to get more money when his contract ended on the horizon, alongside Vucevic asking to be moved in the first place after the situation, this ended up being the move that satisfied both sides. But as a fun fact, did you know that Nikola Vucevic had a no-trade clause in this deal, and he could only be traded if the next team promised to retain his team option the next year? But at least they got a first-round pick out of it and ended that drama in the locker room. At the end of the season, though, we see the Bulls be one of the worst teams in the NBA with a 27-55 record and a bottom 10 offense and defense. I really can't go into much more detail just how bad this team was this year, since it was very uneventful at the same time, but just know there wasn't a lot to look forward to when it came to being a Bulls fan. And considering how many Bulls fans are subscribed to this channel, I know I'm going to see a lot of interesting stories about this in the end. But I will say the 2018 NBA draft class is coming up, and the Bulls have a top 10 pick for the first time in a long time. They originally had the 6th pick, but due to this thing called the draft lottery, they got pushed back a spot. But on a team that could use a little bit of everything, the possibilities on who they can draft are absolutely endless. So with this uneventful season over and done with a tiny bit of optimism when it comes to the rookie season of Lauri Markkanen, how will the Chicago Bulls handle the 2018 NBA draft and this upcoming offseason? Going into the 2018 NBA draft, the Chicago Bulls had an assignment of major importance. They are in a rebuilding era, and it is time to get bangers in the NBA draft to further develop your team and set things up for the future. But with the 7th overall pick, they will miss out on the best of the class, at least what was thought to be, because as we know, the 2018 class created a lot of all-stars and great players all over the map, but at the same time, there was a clear top 5, and the Bulls could not participate in it, unfortunately. So how will the Bulls go about this team that needs a little bit of everything? According to reports all over Chicago media, the battle of the 7th pick was either going to come down to Duke center Wendell Carter Jr. or Villanova wing Mikal Bridges, who both would serve completely different needs on the team and both have potential to do a lot for this team. But as the draft came through, we all know who they ended up choosing.
And now with the 7th pick in the 2018 NBA draft, the Chicago Bulls select Wendell Carter Jr. from Duke University.
The Chicago Bulls chose the Duke Blue Devil Wendell Carter Jr., and as a true freshman in the hectic ACC, Wendell really impressed as a center who can truly do it all for his position, and he fits the modern game in the NBA really well at the time. Whether it was his post moves in the paint, his ability to space the floor where he shot 42% from the three-point line, despite only shooting 1 3 a game, but as we all know, if he has the confidence and the ability to do it, he can easily translate that to the NBA. Or his defensive vitals where he blocked 2 shots a game while owning a 7'5" wingspan. But his most alluring aspect of his game was the fact that he was a very willing passer, and it turned him into getting 2 assists per game and helping Duke's offense become even better. His potential to scout was an Al Horford clone, and even though we know him as the slow old man that he is nowadays, who's playing a great role on the Boston Celtics, in his prime, he was truly a do-it-all center with a very unselfish game that affected the game on both ends. And honestly, that was a perfect comparison. So with this pick, the Bulls have their modern day look of Al Horford, who can be a real threat on both ends and can be a complementary piece to a future core group of players. At the time, they also look into trading up for Texas big man Mo Bamba, but considering how things are looking out for him in the current day, it might be safe to say that they made the right choice. But who knows? Life is interesting like that. Also, comment below if you think Mo Bamba the song has been more relevant than Mo Bamba the person. Give me your thoughts. But as they made their picks that everyone loved, now owning 2 big men who can space out the floor and be versatile threats, the Bulls have a front court to look forward to seeing develop. And lastly, if you want a real inside look at how the organization felt about their future, John Paxson said in his future interview, quote, "This is a really good night for our organization. We feel like when you look at where we're going to be a year from now and what we decided to do, and 1 year later, we feel like we have added 5 really good pieces to build around. That's important to us. We're excited about the direction we're headed." The Bulls this offseason weren't done though, because it was time for Zach Lavine to get paid, as he was a restricted free agent. And as a frequently injured guard whose game is mainly based off his athleticism, the Bulls were in a rough spot with negotiations, and it didn't help that the Sacramento Kings tried to sign him to a 4-year, $72 million deal, a deal that the Bulls matched to keep the young guard and not lose out on his potential. But $19 million a year isn't all that bad for a team that could afford Chicago to pay a lot more in this unfortunate game of uncle. But lastly, the Bulls tried to invest in one more player, this time in the 2nd overall pick of the 2014 draft, Jabari Parker, who is fresh off of a rookie deal with the Milwaukee Bucks, who is also a restricted free agent. But the Bulls decided to play another game of uncle with the Bucks to see if they truly valued him as a player. The Bulls offered him a 2-year, $40 million deal, and to anyone who was anyone knew that that was a crazy deal considering how Jabari has been dealing with injuries and has only played more than 70 games once in his career so far. And with that massive overpay brought to the Bucks, they decided to call uncle and didn't match the offer sheet. On one hand, this could be a great chance to bring back the hometown kid to play for his hometown team and also see if he can overcome all of his massive injury history he's been going through. But on the other hand, you made your 2 most expensive players on the team people who are coming off major injuries that could be a detriment in the future. So while it was a risk with high upside. And at the worst, you have a 2-year deal with Jabari, and $19 million for Zach Lavine isn't the worst contract they ever made. Dwayne Wade. But anyways, going into the 2019 NBA season, there was optimism that this new young core can create some noise. Zach Lavine is healthy and ready to go, and it was time to see what this team is made of after 1 year in this new rebuild. And while their start was expected, I'm guessing the Bulls front office didn't see it that way. 24 games into the season, the Bulls sat at a record of 5 of 19. And you can say that they arguably look worse than last year, and you can see it by them losing games by 15 or more points in 9 of those 19 games. And to add more salt into that wound, they were also one of the worst defenses in the NBA, and offensively, they were equally as bad. So on December 3rd, 2018, the Bulls have fired Fred Hoiberg for his lack of, getting the team to have a competitive spirit. I guess Paxson and Guard thought the Bulls had a composure problem and Hoiberg wasn't helping. But the man who was moved up to help said problem would be Jim Boylen, a longtime assistant coach in the NBA with his first ever test, and it starts with the era that Bulls fans dread the most. Now, Jim Boylen is an interesting coach with interesting ideals and interesting tactics when it comes to dealing with players, but we'll document them as they happen because there is plenty to go over. But let's talk about one of his most viral stories that starts off immediately after he gets hired. Jim Boylen is what some would call a very dictatorship-like coach. And while some would think Tom Thibodeau was the same, if you really think he is, Boylen was much worse. After a 56-point loss to the Celtics on December 8th, yeah, pretty bad, the Chicago Bulls practice after the fact was a living hell, full of suicides, push-ups, and sprints. That is something that you would see from a high school coach dealing with young men, not a team full of grown men who have to deal with a grueling 82-game schedule already. But Boylen was a man who believes in strict discipline and order. And while that would be expected for a younger demographic when it comes to the sport of basketball, doing this with grown-ass men who are considered professionals in the middle of the season is just asking for something bad to happen. Speaking of which, soon after the new year, we'd see rookie Rondo Carter Jr. sustain a left-hand injury as he only lasted 44 games into the season. But in that span, he did impress as a double-double threat and used his defensive vitals to his advantage, averaging 10 points, 7 rebounds, and a block and a half per game. He'd easily be a part of the all-rookie team if it wasn't for that injury, but at least the Bulls know that that hand injury is just a bump in the road. But for the rest of the team, change was coming. On February 6, 2019, the Bulls would trade Jabari Parker, Bobby Portis, and a 2023 second-round pick for the services of Otto Porter Jr. To put it simply, with John Wall injured for the year and even more, the Wizards were trying to save money and saw Jabari Parker's contract as viable since they can waive him and not need to pay Bobby Portis in free agency as his contract was expiring. So the Bulls got Otto, who was on expiring himself, but could be used as a future piece of the franchise as a solid 3-and-D wing. However, also injury prone himself and making $26 million that year. But again, it's an expiring. After this point though, you'd see more drama from the Bulls make top news with Boylen that served as future red flags for this franchise. Whether it was his views on not changing his style for the modern game, saying, quote, "If we are looking at free agents that don't want to work for or play for a competitive coach with great experience, that is going to push them, then I don't know, are we maybe targeting the wrong guys?" His constant use of timeouts, where he went viral for running out of them with 6 minutes left in a February 11th game against the Bucks, or the fact that his reach of the team was so bad, he made a committee of players that made sure that he was on the same page as the team itself. Just so weird, bro. But anyways, let's get away from Boylen. There's a lot to talk about here from this season. First off, the revival of Zach Lavine. In the 2019 NBA season, Zach Attack became a star in Chicago, where he would average a career high in points with 23 points per game while being the main ball handler of the team. But all around, for the rest of the team, there was either a massive downfall or people playing the exact same, which is bad for a tanking team. You're expecting some type of production. Chris Dunn, who came in with a knee injury he sustained in the preseason, would continue to struggle and stay the same as a player even while playing the most minutes he'd see in his career so far at 30 minutes a game. Lauri Markkanen in his sophomore year would see very minimal progression himself, but one way he'd be changing in his young career so far was Jim Boylen making him more of a rebounder and making him more aggressive on that side of the ball. And you'd see it as he'd average a career high 9 rebounds a game, but his scoring numbers and splits basically say the same, which isn't something management wanted to see. And with Otto Porter only surviving 15 games with the Bulls and Wendell being injured for the rest of the season, safe to say this season was a complete wash down the drain, with the only progression coming from Zach Lavine's scoring surge. And you can see it from the team's rankings and standings, because the Bulls this year ended with a record of 22-60, which is 5 games worse than last year, and owned the 3rd least points per game as a team and was bottom 10 in opponent scoring. And guess what? The 2nd to last team in offensive rating in the entire NBA. This team was down to the dumps, and all of Chicago have to witness Jim Boylen be one of the worst coaches in the NBA and just have to pray for someone to step up. And considering that Jim Boylen is the coach and the leader, that's gonna be pretty hard to see. But again, this season is probably one of the worst Bulls fans have ever seen, and the only good thing that came out of it was the fact that the Bulls owned the 4th pick in the 2019 NBA draft. But we'd also have to witness the fact that the Lakers move up from 11th to the 4th pick in the draft, and it moves Chicago back to the 7th pick once again. And while getting 7 3 times in a row is good luck in the jackpot in the casino, for the Bulls, it was a curse they had to deal with, unfortunately. But a top 10 pick is a top 10 pick, and it was up to the Chicago Bulls to make it work once again. Going into the 2019 NBA draft, the automatic draft picks going top 3 were going to be Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, and Ja Morant. But the main storyline outside of that was how many of the players of the class would turn out to be good prospects, as this class was not considered very highly rated across the board. And that means the Bulls would have to dig deep in this class and find somebody good with the 7th overall pick. But going into the draft, of course, we see Zion, RJ Barrett, and Ja all drafted 1, 2, and 3, and the rest of the picks before Chicago turned into Virginia, DPOY, DeAndre Hunter, tournament standout Jarrett Culver, and lastly, Vanderbilt guard Darius Garland. But now with the 7th pick, the Chicago Bulls have a huge decision to make and plenty of prospects to choose from.
With the 7th pick in the 2019 NBA Draft, the Chicago Bulls select Kobe White from the University of North Carolina.
Ja Morant, Darius Garland, and now Kobe White is the 3rd point guard taken off the board to be drafted to the Chicago Bulls. As a top 30 recruit in the 2018 high school class and going to North Carolina, he had the best opportunity to turn 1 year in Chapel Hill into a long career in the NBA. And as a Tar Heel and the 2nd leading scorer of the team, he showed a lot to be desired as a volume scoring guard. But as I always talk about on this channel and in basketball discussions in general, scoring guards got to be extraordinary to really be a staple in the NBA. But as a 6'5" guard, one of the tallest ones in the league, he'd have a great chance of using that to his advantage in the league with time. His other skills may be lacking or be painfully average, but if his scoring can create wins, then it'll be what the Bulls need to create a future core of this franchise. His main goal would probably be to mesh with Zach Lavine and be more of a point guard actually to him, since he was definitely the main ball handler of the team, and Kobe White is a player who needs the ball in his hands to operate also. But as the draft ends with them getting Kobe White and thought to be draft steal Daniel Gafford from Arkansas, the Bulls can go about trying to make something in the 2020 shortened season. In free agency though, we see the Bulls take another interesting route on a young and takey team, whether that is signing NBA veteran Thaddeus Young to a 3-year $43 million deal or trading for 28-year-old Tomas Satoransky. Was this supposed to be a move for progression in some way? I don't know, the world may never know. But it is time for another interesting Jim Boylen story before we get into the 2020 NBA season. Before training camp, a time where a team is supposed to create chemistry and cohesion together in a 1-month period, Jim Boylen wanted to implement a more blue-collar culture to the Chicago Bulls during that time. And he means that literally, as he installed a punch clock at the Bulls practice facility. Yes, a goddamn punch clock to show and document when players came in and left, like a job. Again, a really interesting specimen we're dealing with here, but as the start of the 2020 season began, we'd actually see some slight improvement at the start of the season with a 5-10 record, and in these games, they actually look a lot more competitive than the year before. However, the boiling point of Boylen's antics were about to begin, and it was in the form of a very public feud between Boylen and star player Zach Lavine. On November 22nd, 2019, during a game against the Miami Heat, the Bulls started off being down 13-0, and due to that, Jim Boylen made a substitution to remedy things. But the substitution he made was to take Zach Lavine out and Zach Lavine out alone. Boylen says it was because he made, quote, 3 egregious defensive mistakes, while Lavine barked back after the game, saying, I guess that's just his thing to do. Zach Lavine got 13 points scored on him, I guess. Or was it the starting 5? I don't remember. It was one thing to lose your team, but it's also another thing to piss off the best player on your team by far. And this public feud lasted for the rest of the season. But I think the one thing Maple mentioned about this feud was the fact that the next day on a back-to-back, Zach Lavine would explode, having a career night, scoring 49 points and making 13 threes in 17 attempts, and also making the game-winning shot. Some people say after this game that Zach Lavine's performance was a direct response to what Boylen did the night before, and while this was quite the reaction to get out of your player, this isn't a place you want to stand on and have to negatively impact your players to get a positive return as a mean to prove yourself. But again, the Jim Boylen experience, people, you're just gonna have to deal with it. But let's get away from him again. The Bulls in the shortened and weird 2020 season were still as bad as ever. But Zach Lavine once again would rise to the occasion and improve his numbers once again, averaging 25 points a night and being a near 40% three-point shooter while taking 8 a night. The trade that was made for Jimmy Butler is looking very much worth it right now, seeing him rise to stardom, but of course, we see Chris Dunn still struggle and slowly lose his spot in the rotation, and Lowry is still not finding his footing in the league, staying as a shooter for the squad. But what makes it worse is now that he's having injury issues, playing only 52 games the year before, and now only playing 50 this year. And speaking of injury issues, Wendell Carter Jr. would sustain another long-term injury in the season in his sophomore year in the form of an ankle sprain. So as the team starts to fall apart from injuries and chemistry issues, what does Boylen do to remedy this? Cause more and more issues and become the biggest NBA meme this year. From the start of the new year until the All-Star break, the Bulls owned a record of 6-15 for an overall record of 19-36, and it was all tearing apart. So let's just go over a few more headlines from Boylen just for fun, because this season was a complete mess. On December 11th, he proclaimed a goal he set for the Bulls was to average 35 assists a night, a goal that is low-key impossible as the Bulls were bottom 10 in assists per game, and the record for the most assists ever averaged by a team was 31.4 by the 1983 Lakers. You know, the same Lakers who owned Magic fucking Johnson. On December 16th, he allowed a 22-point comeback to happen against the Thunder, but he also set up his team to fail by using up all of his timeouts prematurely in the third quarter, and it caused the Thunder to win that same game. Because again, Jim Boylen has a huge timeout problem, and it was very much highlighted at this time. When he was questioned about his use of timeouts, he responded by saying, "We practice not to have timeouts. I'm not in fear mode when we don't have timeouts because we're prepared to not have them." Or how about on January 6th, when Daniel Gafford rolled his ankle and Boylen wouldn't call a timeout to get him out of the game. So Rick Carlisle, coach of the Mavericks at the time, felt so bad for him that he called the timeout for Gafford's sake instead. And I think the final straw was the response that he had about the team's record in a February 25th interview as the Bulls sat 20-39, and he's being regarded as one of the worst NBA coaches of all time. He said, and bear with me here, and I quote, "It is hard for me, but that is not my calling. That is not what they asked me to do. Nobody in this organization said to me, you got to win this many games. Nobody said that to me. Hey, we're going to talk about wins and losses all year. Not one time did they say that to me. That doesn't mean we don't want to win. It doesn't mean we aren't trying to win, but no one said that to me." Not going to lie, fam, that sounds like something a child would say, but it's safe to say for 2 straight years, the Chicago Bulls faithful had to watch an incompetent man run a team into the dirt with one of the weirdest coaching philosophies the world has ever seen, and it caused a lot of damage to this rebuild, and you'll be seeing that in the future. But it was mainly in the form of Lauri Markkanen, who has looked the exact same ever since he came into the league and has failed to do anything in the realm of development. We'd even seen Alexa Kobe White, who you think would be the future of the Bulls as the point guard, be put on a short leash as a rookie while starting Tomas Satoransky and Chris Dunn over him. Again, you think the younger guys will be the priority in a rebuild, but not under the reign of Boylen. Legit, the only positive of this team is Zach Lavine scoring, but even that has been sabotaged at times with Boylen's antics. And with that, it turns into a 22-43 record with one of the worst offenses in the NBA and a team that hasn't jumped in years and stayed absolutely stagnant at the bottom. So where does this leave the Bulls? Well, this time around, Lady Luck has blessed them with a jump in the lottery from the 7th odds again for the 4th year in a row to get the 4th pick in the 2021 class, which does mean, again, they miss out on the immediate top 3 picks in D'Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, and James Wiseman. But that does also mean they get the next best person if they do their homework and make an educated pick in a very highly rated draft class. But that'll happen without 2 big figures on this team going forward. First, a month after the regular season ended, Gar Forman, the GM of the Bulls since 2009, would be fired. And while it wouldn't be over anything specific, the many duds he has had since DRose left means that it is time for someone new to have a chance at fixing the Chicago Bulls. And that person would be Arturas Karnisovas, a former Denver Nuggets GM. His goal is to, of course, bring this team back to prominence, but at the same time, John Paxson and owner Jerry Reisendorf, I think I pronounced that right, were impressed by his philosophy on how he go about this change. But you want to know what his first decision as GM would be? Well, you guessed it, firing Jim Boylen on August 14th, 2020. And I won't even rag on the poor man anymore. I have done enough of that, but as we all know, he was fired and it wasn't unexpected in the slightest. In fact, his firing was rejoiced by anyone who is a Chicago Bulls fan. And his replacement, someone with actual experience as a head coach in the league, Billy Donovan, the former OKC Thunder coach, who is now out of a job due to their upcoming rebuild and is now coming in to help Chicago back to prominence. So now we finally have a new age of Chicago basketball, and it is being led by a person with actual sense on how to operate a professional basketball teams. But of course, we have to see how these new figures will go about making this rebuild and the new era go in a positive direction. Going into the 2020 NBA draft, once again, the Chicago Bulls really do miss out on getting a top 3 prospect of a draft class, but with the 4th pick, they do get an opportunity to get the next best person. And in a draft class with a ton of great prospects, the Bulls can still get a great value with that 4th pick with a future all-star or just a glue guy in the future. And the likes of Tyrese Halliburton, Kira Lewis Jr., LaMelo Ball if he were to drop, and many more prospects coming in for workouts for a chance to be a future Chicago Bull. There's only one person that can be drafted, and the person they drafted shocked the entire NBA world.
With the 4th pick in the 2020 NBA Draft, the Chicago Bulls select Patrick Williams from Florida State University.
Woo. Patrick Lee Williams, the man who made the NBA world stop in real time, because the Chicago Bulls will use the 4th overall pick on the ACC 6th Man of the Year from Florida State. But what made the NBA world so shocked is the fact that compared to the first 3 picks, Patrick Williams was the epitome of potential only and was nowhere near a day 1 NBA rookie player. We went from 3 players who were thought to be players who could be franchise guys to a player who had to be fully invested into to reach his full potential. There was so much risk involved with this pick, and the Chicago Bulls were willing to take on that challenge. But to slightly defend this pick somewhat, a Florida State Patrick Williams was a 6'8", 220-pound specimen with a 7-foot wingspan to match that screams NBA wing. And in his freshman year at Florida State, we see him show off those defensive vitals, averaging a steal and a block per game, be a competent and willing shooter, and have a pretty good athleticism to his body to match. But the only problem is that there wasn't much to look at when it came to film, considering his 6-man status. So this pick was truly made off of faith, as he played only 22 minutes a night in his freshman year. And of course, as it was the trend back then, he was given Kawhi Leonard comparisons for his vitals and for the fact that Kawhi himself was an incomplete player coming in and was molded to what he was in San Antonio. Only difference is San Antonio is known for creating players in their system, while Chicago, on the other hand, as we have seen, is the complete opposite of that. But the new GM of the Bull, Arturas, shut down people's criticism as he applauded Patrick for his ability to keep his skill set from when he was previously a 6-foot point guard that grew into a 6'8" wing, and compared him to Scottie Pippen, a Chicago Bulls legend, due to that. He also mentioned that his skill set was very underrated and he never got to showcase what it was at Florida State and instead be put into a role, which I can understand as a non-primary player on a team that isn't given responsibilities to take any of the offensive load. So as we all criticize this pick, the GM knew what he did and he had high hopes for the 18-year-old. And it was a very quiet offseason for the Bulls, and they were ready to show off their new team under Billy Donovan as the coach. No time card punching, no more toxicity. It is time for Chicago Bulls basketball to return for the 2021 NBA season. And it was safe to say the beginning of this season was up and down, to say the least, but Billy Donovan was trying to make the most out of this team. But what wasn't clarified was if the Bulls are trying to go in win now mode, or were they still trying to tank and take their time with things in this rebuild. But with a 16-18 start going into March in the very weird 2021 NBA season, the Bulls were thought to be trying to make noise, as the turnaround was really happening. And it was highlighted by one man and one man only, that man being Zach Lavine, who once again takes another stride in his career, averaging a career-high 27 points a night and becoming a top 15 scorer in the NBA ranks, while absolutely carrying his teams to victory night after night. Whether it was the fact that he is now a 40% three-point shooter or how he's converting over 50% of his shots, Zach Lavine was truly looking like a star in the Windy City and was rewarded for his efforts with his first ever All-Star appearance of his career, and it was truly deserved. But while his team was far from perfect, at least the Bulls know that there is a true leader on this team, and this leader has a real coach who's behind him every step of the way. However, when it came to the other pieces of this roster, we see some difficulties. First off, the two other pieces of the Jimmy Butler move, they ain't doing so well. Firstly, with Chris Dunn, who has spent 2 seasons with the Bulls, is now gone, and he wasn't brought back with the Bulls in free agency, let alone anyone, as he is now a bench player for the Atlanta Hawks. But what people really had concerned about was the other piece in Lauri Markkanen, who went from a promising three-point chucking rookie to an off-the-bench scorer, as after the All-Star break, he'd be permanently put in a bench role and receiving inconsistent minutes. But what I think is the true culprit for this issue was the way the Bulls were playing, as they didn't have a point guard or at least a true playmaker who could be tasked with getting people set up, and the fact that Lauri was more of an on-ball scorer really didn't help, and the fact that his on-ball scoring skills wasn't really there yet also didn't help. And considering that Zach Lavine had a top 10 usage rate this season and wasn't too good of a playmaker himself, Lauri suffered in the starting lineup. But at least his numbers stabilized, averaging 13 points a game and now being a 40% three-point shooter this year. But his current position on the team, it was safe to say, was the fact that he was a role player, and a role player on a contract year. And that hurts even more that the fact that only one piece of the Jimmy Butler move turned into anything substantial due to the mismanagement of Lauri Markkanen and the fact that Chris Dunn was just a bust. Next thing that we see, though, is the fall of another lottery pick they made, this time in Wendell Carter Jr., who, coming off another injury-riddled season last year, starts the first 14 games of the season, then went down to another injury, this time in the form of a severe right quadricep contusion. And after nearly a month of recovering, whether it was caution to his injury history or just to give somebody else a chance, Billy Donovan will also bench Wendell for the likes of Thaddeus Young. It was an interesting decision, but it was more of a move to stop the injury-prone Wendell from having so many opportunities to get hurt, and also providing the starting lineup a unit who can stay together, be healthy, and gel long-term. But the most interesting move doesn't stop there, because with a record of 19-24 and being the 10th seed in the East with a chance of making the NBA playoffs to the play-in, for the first time in years, the Bulls front office would cook up a trade that would have huge consequences if it went wrong.
Breaking news, and well, the NBA trade deadline is upon us. And the Magic and the Bulls sparking a little possible deal here. Reports that the Magic are trading Nikola Vucevic to the Bulls. A lot to break down here. This is one of the targets a lot of teams had on their wish list before 3 p.m. today, but it seems like the big fella's heading to Chicago. Taking a look at how this all breaks down for both teams. Vucevic is headed to Chicago with Al-Farouq Amino. The Magic are getting Wendell Carter Jr., a guy they drafted not too long ago, and Otto Porter, along with 2 first-round picks in 2021, a top 4 protected pick, and in 2023, another first round as well. So it looks like Chicago getting the big fella to add to their team there, while the Magic look to rebuild now with no longer Vucevic in the fold there.
Yep, you heard that right. March 25th, 2021, with only 28 games left in the year, and the Bulls currently sitting at the 10th spot in the East. The Bulls are the sign that it is time to buy into this team now. Yes, now. And invest in Zach Lavine's success by trading for 2-time All-Star, and funny enough, an All-Star this year, Nikola Vucevic. Nikola at this time was already known as one of the most underrated bigs in the NBA, with a super versatile game that can fit perfectly for the Bulls with his ability to shoot, score in the paint, and play make. As a lot of people saw it, they traded for a final version of what Wendell could have been, but as the Magic got tired of his injuries and lack of progression due to it, the Bulls traded him. The Bulls traded him, Otto Porter, and 2 first-round picks for him. But while the Bulls have traded for a consistent All-Star, the Bulls also traded a top 4 protected pick in the draft and an unprotected pick in 2023. Which means if this falls apart, this trade could have been seen as a real steal for the Magic, and at horrible value value for the Bulls. But at the time, the Bulls were trading for a 30-year-old Vucevic at his peak value as a player, considering that he's an all-star, and the opinions were mixed at the time, thinking that both sides got a potential steal. But what it was mainly up to was the Bulls to make sure that they were the winners of this trade by making the playoffs and making sure the Magic couldn't easily get a top 10 pick for free when they are rebuilding. It doesn't stop there though, but the Bulls would also trade their second round pick in the 2019 class, Daniel Gafford, Chandler Hutchinson, and Luke Cornett in a 3-team deal to get back Javonte Green, Daniel Theis, and Troy Brown Jr. from the Celtics and Wizards. The Bulls really valued the services of Troy Brown at the time, who emerged as a defensive, versatile 3-and-D wing, and as his value was slipping in Washington, this was the Bulls' chance to trade for him. But it did come at the cost of Gafford, who carved a role as an energetic center with great defensive instincts. But anyways, the rest of the season still needs to be talked about, and the Bulls are ready to see what this new core can do, especially from the likes of Vucevic and Zach Lavine. And since the trade to the end of the season, the Bulls would go 12-17, which isn't bad, but it was certainly less than fans expected with a now newly acquitted all-star on their team. Vucevic's new role as the co-star would impress though, even if it was a slow start, averaging a 21 point, 11 rebound double-double with 4 assists alongside that. But while the production came from the top 2 players on the team, the problem the Bulls had, and that was a very loud problem, being the fact that they were dead last in free throw attempts and makes. They create the 4th most turnovers as a team, and offensively speaking, they are not special at all as a group. They have the names to make things happen from the front end, but as a unit, they struggle to put up points, ranking bottom 10 in team points per game. And at the end of the day, with a record of 31-41, they did see some improvement from the year before, but it probably wasn't enough to satisfy all parties, especially as they would end the season as the 11th seed and they would miss the play-in tournament. And now the pick that they traded to the Orlando Magic is valued at the 8th spot pre-lottery, which means they lose their pick and not make the playoffs at the same time. A lose-lose situation when it came to this trade and both sides. A terrible fate that the Bulls put themselves into and knew all the consequences of going into it. But overall, improvement is improvement. There's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and there's still a little bit of positive, even if it did come at the cost of their first round pick. Again, the trade-off for an aging Vucevic is starting to look not worth it, but to highlight a few people at the end of the day, it is a very interesting season that we would see from Patrick Williams be a full-time starter, and due to his team position against Zach Lavine's status as the star, Patrick in his first season mainly stayed as a 3D player and was rarely called upon to score the ball. He carved his role and played it pretty well though, but his rookie season was pretty much put in the back burner as his potential that the GM raved about would not be tapped into in the slightest. We'd also see second-year player Coby White become a full-time starter after his time with Boylen the year before, and while he didn't improve all that much to say the least, historically speaking, guards take the longest time to get used to the NBA game, as it is a game full of giants at the end of the day. So it either stays true that he's going to improve and take that jump eventually, or he'll just stay at where he is and become a bust himself. But with time, he's a sophomore. But the fate of this team is officially sealed. They are now trying to buy in immediately and go after an NBA championship with an unlikely duo of a dynamic scorer in Zach Lavine and a versatile big in Nikola Vucevic. Despite going into the offseason without their pick, there's still a lot of upside to this team if the right decisions are made and some type of development happens from this team. But how will the GM of the Bulls truly show the people of Chicago that the trade he made last year was worth it and that he is trying his hardest to get this team where it needs to be sooner rather than later? The 2021 offseason for the Chicago Bulls to this day is probably the most excited Bulls fans have been in the last decade in their fandom, because the amount of 10 out of 10 moves GM Karmisonis made in the 2-month span to truly buy in is possibly one of the best GM debut moments in NBA history. But first, we gotta rip off the band-aid and endure some slight pain that the same GM put onto their team. The 2021 NBA draft would have been a great time to pick up an extra player in their growing core of players, especially with the 8th pick in the class. But instead, the Magic got to take advantage of the Bulls' future to protect their pick well enough and picked up Franz Wagner from Michigan. As we all know, just to skip ahead a couple years, Franz made himself into a great second option on an Orlando Magic team that is playoff bound, and that was directly affected by the Nikola Vucevic trade itself. And to imagine the Bulls could have gotten another great forward in him, Jonathan Kuminga, or another center in Alperen Sengun. But in that same draft, they did go on and pick up Illinois standout and Bob Cousy Award winner Aino Dosunmu in the second round, who has a lot of upside as an energetic and do-it-all guard, but missing out on the potential future all-stars in this class with the 8th pick is still going to hurt some Bulls fans nonetheless. But anyways, as I said earlier, the Bulls GM was about to cook up some amazing deals made to put in the Bulls back in championship mode, as there were many teams to take advantage of who were in interesting scenarios individually. First off, in August 8th, the Pelicans would trade away young guard Lonzo Ball for the price of only Garrett Temple, Tomas Satoransky, and a 2024 second-round pick. This move was considered to be a very necessary one, as he could cause amazing benefits to the Bulls, getting him an amazing playmaker in Lonzo, and of course a great point-of-attack defender who could be a ball handler, set up teammates, and in this case for Lavine and Vucevic, also serve as a great catch-and-shoot threat, as he was continuously improving his shooting abilities over the years with the Pelicans and Lakers. And he was also a restricted free agent, and the Bulls were able to get him on a cheap 4-year, $20 million deal. A steal for what his potential value could be in a couple of years as he gels into this role. But this team's summer isn't over yet, as they would sign Los Angeles Laker guard Alex Caruso, who wanted to go back to LA originally on a cheaper deal, but was rejected. So he went to Chicago on a 4-year, $36 million deal to be what he was for the Lakers. A hustling wing who can be great defensively and hit a three-pointer when needed. Again, another great and underrated pickup. But while this team was being built, it was still safe to say at this point in time, the Bulls are still a bottom-tier playoff team at their highest in the East, with their potential being a 6th seed in a very top-heavy Eastern Conference, with many teams on the rise. But the move they made on August 11, 2021 would serve as Carney Silva's master plan to finally add a player who can put the Bulls' hat in the ring as an Eastern Conference dark horse team.
Bulls are one of those teams, Woj, that the NBA is better when Chicago is good. I feel like all of a sudden they've gotten a lot better. They had 2 starters in free agency, Lonzo Ball yesterday and Demar Derozan today. How'd the Bulls get that last one done?
Yeah, Demar Derozan needed a landing spot. There wasn't really salary cap space out there for the kind of deal that he wanted, which ultimately was 3 years, $85 million plus in Chicago. So the sign and trade route. And Chicago, giving up another first-round pick, a couple second-round picks. The Bulls have traded picks in the Nikola Vucevic trade back at the trade deadline. So they've remade their team. They've gone in now with Lonzo Ball, Vucevic, and now DeMar DeRozan with a team that I think Billy Donovan, their head coach, there's going to be expectations of making the postseason. And I think the relationship with Mark Eversley, who's the general manager, works with Arturas Karnisovas, their president, his relationship with DeRozan, going back to their days in Toronto, I believe that was a key factor in helping to sell DeRozan on it. And I think Eversley and Karnisovas' comfort with bringing DeMar DeRozan in and seeing if he can help elevate this team. And Zach Lavine, his future in Chicago. He wants to win, hasn't been in the playoffs yet. They've got to get into the postseason.
Yes, you heard that right. The Chicago Bulls are now adding their best player they added in free agency in a long time. This being in the form of the 4-time All-Star and 2-time All-NBA member, DeMar DeRozan. And it only came at the price of Al-Farouq Aminu, Thaddeus Young, 2 second-round picks, and an unprotected 2025 first-round pick. And at the time, this trade was considered to be a big-time steal for a 32-year-old DeMar DeRozan who is still at the top of his game and will probably stay that way as long as he doesn't suffer any big-time injuries. But it's even crazier to think that they traded more value for the Vucevic trade than they did for the DeMar DeRozan trade. Anyways, in this sign and trade deal, DeMar came in with a fresh 3-year, $81 million deal, and now the Bulls can actually be put in the conversation of one of the best teams in the East with 2 top-tier scorers in DeMar and Lavine and a complimentary piece in Vucevic. A big 3 of all-star level players, and the most excited Bulls fans have been in a long while. But one more person had to be addressed, and that was the future of Lauri Markkanen, the man who you could argue has been screwed over the most on this team since his arrival to the Windy City. Whether that was by his coaches and the clear lack of a role with the chance of development in the future. And due to that and his request to leave, the Bulls traded him to the Cavs in a sign and trade deal worth 4 years and $67 million to receive back Derrick Jones Jr. and a first and second round pick in a 3-team deal. It sucks that Lowry was never able to work out on this team and be what people thought he'd be, especially considering where he is now. But again, I mainly put down on the fact that he was never able to get the green light to do things and never had a team that at least gave him more opportunities to make moves. If anything, with DeMar and Lonzo on the team, this would have been the time for Lowry to really impress as a catch and shoot threat, but Lowry axed out and they got his wish. So over the span of this offseason, the Bulls were able to turn a middling and struggling team into a sign and trade deal with both Lonzo and Demar Derozan and signed Alex Caruso. This team wants to go in the direction of victory, and the front office gave Billy Donovan the keys to at least make a deep playoff run. And with a day one lineup of Lonzo Ball, Zach Lavine, Demar Derozan, Patrick Williams, and now Nikola Vucevic, you'd be crazy to say that this wasn't, at least as it sounds on paper, a top 5 to 10 starting lineup in the NBA. And they did not disappoint with that expectation being high, starting the season off at the top of the Eastern Conference with a New Year's record of 24-10. And in the start to the season, you would see the Bulls hit on every angle possible and be one of the most dynamic teams in the East. Lonzo Ball and his third team will be exactly what the Bulls needed when it came to playmaking, and most importantly, he would serve as the best perimeter defender on the team, alongside hitting over 40% of his threes and 7 attempts per game. His time in New Orleans truly helped him in his skill set, and now in Chicago, he can showcase the fruits of his labor. Next, Zach Lavine now serving more of an off-ball role with DeMar and Lonzo taking care of the ball. You would see him put up relatively the same numbers as last year, still balling out at an all-star level. However, the real difference maker is DeMar Derozan, who came in, became the top scorer of the team at 27 points per game, his best numbers since the 2017 campaign in Toronto, and truly made this team go into the best tier as contenders at the time. Of course, the start of this season would be highlighted by DeMar Derozan hitting 2 straight game winners back-to-back on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day that truly made it seem like the Arturas Karnisovas was a genius at team building, alongside Billy Donovan being a way better coach than the last one who must not be named. Then, when you add Vucevic playing well in his role and Coby White finding his role as a 6th man, you get a team who is dominating the Eastern Conference early in the season. But every good story gotta have a little bit of trials and tribulations, and it came in the form of 2 major injuries. First off, Patrick Williams' story continues to become more like the Lauri Markkanen story all over again, where he isn't getting the opportunities you think a player of his vitals would need if you wanted him to become what you think he'd be at the 4th overall pick of a draft. But there would be another bump in the road with him tearing ligaments in his wrist that would sideline him until the later parts of the season. But to add insult to injury, literally, I guess, the point guard they traded for and gave a new home in Lonzo Ball will receive his worst injury of his career a few games after the new year, tearing his meniscus in his knee that would sideline him for the rest of the regular season. But just like that, you lose out on 2 vital pieces of the core that served as a heavy part of the early success of the Chicago Bulls. But as they maintain their status as the first seed over time, both DeMar and Zach Lavine would both be awarded spots on the 2022 All-Star roster, with DeMar as a starter and Zach as a reserve. Even with the injuries of 2 day 1 starters, they maintained their first seed status from January 1st to February 25th. But after that, you see a very slow decline of the Bulls that will drop them all the way down the standings day by day. Since the All-Star break, they end their season 8-15 and would go down from the 1st seed all the way down to the 6th seed, avoiding the play-in by 2 measly games. But how though? Well, for one, their strength of schedule at the tail end of the season will be one of the hardest in the Eastern Conference, and with that comes another unfortunate fact that will be learned by Bulls fans all over, as the Bulls were 1-14 versus top teams in the Eastern Conference and 1-17 versus top seeds in the Western Conference. So the Bulls' reign over the East was thought to be more of a hot streak, and the version we see now is the actual version, despite the injuries, of course. A team who could truly not compete at the top, despite what their record stated early on, and with an ending record of 46-36, it was a major improvement from the year before. But with a stat like that now being held over your head and known by the general public, the talks about them being an easy first round out seem louder and louder at the end of the season, especially as they are the 6th seed going against the 3rd seed. But first, some highlights. Demar Derozan truly revived himself in Chicago and was rewarded for his play by being a part of the All-NBA second team, and he definitely deserved it by leading the Bulls to this spot, ending the season top 5 in scoring, and crazy enough, being the leaders in field goals made all year as a forward and someone who relies on his mid-range game to be a difference maker offensively. Some people consider this to be Demar Derozan's most impressive season individually, especially as he's at the later part of his prime, but as the best player on the Bulls, the goal is to overcome that one stat I spoke of earlier by facing a top seed in the Eastern Conference, the Milwaukee Bucks. And it's a matchup where the Bulls do not stand very well wise with a 2-time MVP, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who has the pleasure of knowing he gets to drive in on the front court of DeMar, Patrick Williams, who's now back from injury, and Nikola Vucevic. It's a very tall ask, but can the Bulls somehow take down one of the best players in the NBA and one of the best teams in the NBA that they struggled with in their division? Well, to start off with game 1, we see an absolute slugfest with the final score ended up being 93-86, and also truly see the difficulties that I spoke of that the Bulls would face. Mainly as Demar Derozan would have to score against one of the toughest front court defensive duos in the NBA as a player who mainly operates inside the arc. And as he shot 6 of 25 from the field, you could tell this was going to be a long series for him. But another thing that would go against the Bulls matchup wise was the fact that the Bulls were last in 3-point attempts and makes, and as we all know, the Bucks want you to beat them from the 3-point line. A very unfortunate fact that they would learn later in this year. The Bulls tried to go off their usual strategy and take advantage of this fact, but the team shot 7 of 37 from 3 that night, shooting 18% from 3. Again, very long series ahead of the Bulls. However, we would see the Bulls even things up in game 2 with a masterclass from Demar Derozan scoring 41 points and also getting a contribution from Vooch and Zach Lavine scoring 24 and 20 points respectively. But this would be the highlight of their series, unfortunately, as the Bulls would lose by 30 in game 3, 24 in game 4, and 16 in game 5 to lose the series in a gentleman sweep. The story of the series, the big 3 in Chicago, struggling big time this series and not adapting at all while getting dogged by the Bulls, by the Bucks I mean, in 3 straight games. I mainly put that on the fact that the Bucks were like the literal worst matchup for them possible out of all the top Eastern Conference teams, but a playoff L is a playoff L, and it is back to the drawing board for them. We can all understand the injuries that happened that took them off their groove, but it seemed like the Bulls can't adapt when they needed to, or they truly are just not the team that we thought them to be. And with Lonzo Ball having complications in his knee and most likely not coming back the next year, the Bulls need to find a way to either remedy this or they will be in a very interesting spot as a team in the future, especially as the contracts of their main pieces are going to need to be addressed soon. If the 2021 offseason was all about adding players to put this team to the next level, then this offseason is all about trying to remedy last year's issues the team have. But what if I told you a lot of their issues from last year were not addressed in the slightest in this offseason? Team composition is a very important aspect of being a GM, and while Arturas came through last year with talent, you could argue this time around he was going more for names that used to be talent that he could sign for a cheap deal. First, we have former All-Star center Andre Drummond, who has been on the biggest decline when it comes to where he was at as a player in the past, now getting paid a 2-year, $6 million deal. Does Andre Drummond fix any of the issues the Bulls have? I mean, they are a below-average rebounding team, but as we'll see later, his signing meant absolutely nothing to this team, as he would barely even play. Next, they re-signed Derrick Jones Jr. to another 2-year, $6 million deal to provide defensive versatility, but he was a big part of the Bulls shooting problem, providing little spacing himself, and for their last signing they made, it was meant to help them out at their point guard position, as Coby White will be the starting point guard next year by adding bench depth and Goran Dragic, who has been looking for a new home since last year to be on a contender, and pulling him away from the Mavericks where he'd end up playing with Slovenian teammate Luka Doncic. But lastly, someone also has to get paid, and big time, and this time it is the second coming of Zach Lavine, who is now more than proved himself as a star player after his rookie extension, where you could argue he got stiffed just a little bit. And for that, he earned a 5-year massive $215 million deal that'll last until he is 30 years of age, which honestly is a pretty good deal that'll last until the tail end of his prime. But the goal should always be to win, and the Bulls still believe that Zach can be a great piece to bring Chicago a championship in this time. Maybe not as the main guy, but you just never know, I guess. But as discussed earlier, the Bulls still have a glaring problem, and their team still seems the same with no real actual change. And with Lonzo Ball still out and expected to be out the entire year, the Bulls still need to learn to win without him. But with the 2023 season starting, there is a clear trend happening with the Bulls, and that trend is that they are inconsistently consistent. At every point in this season, you truly didn't know what to expect from this team performance-wise, but something else we'd also see is the fact that despite the signings they made to help out, Billy Donovan basically rolled out the same rotation from last year full-time in this season. And just like their performance in the year before, it was replicated once again. At the All-Star break, the Bulls would go into it with a record of 26-33 and on a huge 6-game losing streak at the time, from 1 game under 500 to now 7 games under 500. And the 11th seed in the East. Yes, they are regressing hard this year, and they are having to face the fact, just like I mentioned before, younger teams are getting better, and some teams are creating rosters who are better for the modern game, unlike their team. Once again, the Bulls are anti-modern NBA, shooting the least amount of threes per game by a long shot, and even being below average as a team shooting them when they did. And with that, the Bulls are also a bottom 10 team scoring wise, and it wasn't because they sucked offensively, not at all. They had the 4th best team field goal percentage at 49%, but it was also the fact that they aren't with the times, and they are struggling and falling behind because of it. And injuries cannot be blamed this time around, as the big three themselves are all playing over 74 games in the season, and of course while they're missing Lonzo Ball, but they can't find any way to adapt or fix their current system that will cause some type of relief of this current problem. And while Demar Derozan would be announced to be a part of the All-Star game for the 2nd straight season as a Bull, that optimism would not carry over for the rest of the season, because the Bulls would continue after the All-Star break in their losing ways. They would try to remedy their problems from earlier that I spoke of by adding more talent, as Goran Dragic will be waived for the services of Patrick Beverley, who would provide more defense to the team, a side of basketball they do excel at, being the 5th best defense in the NBA. But of course, they are also the 6th worst offense in the NBA, which makes this team one of the most polarizing in nature. But as they finished the season 14-9 and slightly turning things around at the end, it still wasn't enough to make any type of solid footing in their record, and only making it as the 10th seed, the last place you could be in the play-in tournament, which means to make the playoffs, they have to win 2 straight games, and that would only give them the 8th seed, which means they would have to face the Milwaukee Bucks again. Oh, lucky days, am I right? But one thing I realized last season, and want to mention now, the Bulls completely over-rely on this big three to give them wins night after night. Last year, you had Demar Derozan hard carrying this team into victory, and Coby White was a solid 6-man off the bench. But this year, you would see a slight decrease from Demar, still a great player, just not what he was last year. But also, Coby White would actually be demoted slightly for the likes of the 2nd-year player Ayo Dosunmu, and later Patrick Beverley, due to them leaning more towards their defensive strengths. But while defense wins championships, you still have to outscore the team to win games in the first place. So Coby White would lose his role big time, and it made their scoring struggles even worse. But speaking of defense, we'd see Alex Caruso, a really underrated pickup from last year, be a part of the all-defensive first team, as he served as the team's best defender and had many highlights on that end. And of course, too, he gets a lot of the credit of why the Bulls were a top 5 defense in the first place, too. So now we roll on in to the NBA play-in, where the Bulls are on the brink of playoff contention and have to face off against the Toronto Raptors for a chance to continue their playoff hopes, even though it's against the Milwaukee Bucks. But I'm not going to act like the Heat didn't knock them out in the first round, so there's always a chance for something. As we remember, though, this game was absolutely great, but in the funniest way possible, due to the antics of DeMar DeRozan's daughter, who would scream every single time the Raptors shot free throws. And why I don't believe this is why the Raptors were so bad that day from the line. For comedic sake, I'm just going to say that was the reason why the Raptors were nerfed.
Particular game, if he steps the wrong way or
visit to Florida State, ask him, what did you? Underrated passer, doing a nice job. Tell me life is really good for him right now. He's in a good
In that game, we see the Bulls make an 11-point comeback at the start of the fourth quarter, with Zach Lavine would take over, scoring 13 points in that quarter alone. And we also see the Raptors go 5 of 10 for the free throw line of the quarter, as the Bulls would win the game 109-105. Again, just for reference, the Raptors shot 18 of 36 from the free throw line that night. That absolutely ruined their chances of winning their game in their biggest game of the season. But thank God for Demar Derozan using her voice to make a change. But unfortunately, due to her being a child, she had to go to school and miss the next game against the Miami Heat in Miami, a game against the eventual representatives of the finals in the Eastern Conference. But as we all remember, they would end up losing that game 91-102, and seeing Zach Lavine having one of his worst games of the year, shooting 6 of 21 and turning over the ball 5 times, while also seeing Jimmy Butler and Max Strus combine for 62 points together, ending their season in a very disappointing manner as a 40-42 team. So as the season ends, there is a lot of questions to answer that is going to cause some very uncomfortable offseason scenarios, and of course, the upcoming 2024 NBA campaign. The contracts of Nikola Vucevic has officially ended this year, and Demar Derozan's contract ends after next season. In this 2-year span, we've already seen this team regress despite having 3 all-star level players on their team playing together that cannot find ways to win somehow. While they aren't the best quality all-stars or all-NBA level players, you'd at least expect a bare minimum a 6th seed in a very top-heavy conference. So what now? Do you let Vucevic walk and trade DeMar as he gets older? Do you run it back and hope for the best? There's a lot of ways this can go down, and there is only a few outcomes you want to see. And obviously, the outcome you don't want from this is for them to stay in the middle of the road or just straight up not making the playoffs at all and wasting the time of the players and the Chicago fans. And now we are in the current day. The Bulls are in a worse place than last year, and it seriously makes this next offseason even more complicated for Chicago. So let's go over how screwed the Bulls can potentially be, because their season isn't really worth talking about, and they are about to return to the play-in just to either lose in the first round of the playoffs or just not make it all in the worst case scenario. So first off, Zach Lavine in his second season with his new mega deal only played 25 games this year and is out for the rest of the year due to problems in his foot that he got a season-ending surgery for. While the Bulls are also struggling, at one point they almost decided to break it all down and trade Zach during the trade deadline, and then did it, which caused even more uncertainty between Zach and the front office. And now with that, Zach might find out once again that the NBA is a business at the end of the day, and if he gives the team any reason to doubt him, he will be kicked out again. Next, the Bulls would commit themselves to the big three after not trading any of the all-stars they have, even with Nikola Vucevic being on a very team-friendly contract of 3 years and $60 million. And this can come with very interesting implications. Does Arturas think that the Bulls can still compete in the Eastern Conference, or are the deals just that bad for Vooch, Zach, and DeMar? Speaking of DeMar Derozan, at 34 years old, he's on an expiring deal and couldn't be dealt away. Does he leave for nothing in this offseason and you truly fall off? Because let me remind you, the Spurs own the Bulls' unprotected pick in 2025, next season. The Bulls might have been fleeced once again, trading for an all-star level player if that were to happen. Third, once again, Lonzo Ball would miss out on the entire season during rehab, and while he is making progress, who knows how he'll be coming into next season after missing out on 2 straight years of professional basketball and could be on a potential bum knee. Something I don't want to see, but obviously there might be a case that happens. And with this player option coming up next year, it is safe to say the Bulls will have to deal with him for another year bare minimum. And lastly, Patrick Williams, the project player that never got worked on outside of him being a good 3-point shooter in the NBA, has a season-ending injury himself and is looking to get paid. And a lot despite his production, which will put the Bulls in another interesting direction. Just like with the Larry Markkinen move, you saw him leave and become an all-star, and now you're going to have to see if you want to trade him away to potentially have the same type of impact, or do you keep him and keep him at his current role? Will the Bulls let him walk for nothing or match a team's testing the Bulls' sense of worth of the former 4th overall pick? Arturas Karnisovas has a big summer coming up that'll truly show his GM skills and if he is made to deal with a hectic situation like this. Do you trade the big three you created and try to get as much value as you can just to take the L in the 2025 draft? Or do you keep trying and trying to build a core despite their lack of success in an Eastern Conference that is only going to get better as young teams like the Magic, Pacers, and Cavaliers get better and become perennial playoff teams while you are stuck struggling and crawling to the play-in year after year? Well, with only 1 month of NBA basketball left at the time of me writing this video, y'all know these take a long time, the Bulls got decisions to make and have to choose a side. Believe this team is good enough or break it all down. But if you keep it together, being in the middle of the pack and the play-in year after year will do more harm than good. Also, shout out to Coby White, by the way. I hope he wins the most improved player this year. But with that being said, tell me what team timeline you'd like to see next and your thoughts on this video. And until next time.